Imagine you were facilitating an off-site leadership training course, and a manager pulls you aside during a break. Now, the session's been productive, without a doubt. The team is aligned on goals, the strategy feels solid, and it's moving in a really good direction. In fact, everything is coming together. Yet, in a quieter moment, this leader admits something rather unsettling. Says, I know I should feel more from my team right now, but I just don't have it in me. He isn't indifferent by nature. He cares about his people, always has, always will. In fact, he's invested years in developing them. But lately between restructuring, nonstop headlines, and the constant pressure to deliver results, something in him feels dulled. Something's off. Something's not quite right. In fact, his responses are shorter, his patience is thinner, and his curiosity has narrowed, almost disappeared as a matter of fact. What you are witnessing is not a character flaw. It is what I call empathic amnesia, the gradual forgetting of how to be empathetic in real time when it's really needed, not because the capacity is gone, but because strain, overload, and emotional fatigue, they've buried it. The most concerning part is that empathic amnesia rarely announces itself. It evolves. In fact, more typically, it shows up disguised, appearing as efficiency, decisiveness, and focus. Only later do we begin recognizing that our connections have quietly eroded. That's the cost of focusing on the bottom line rather than the connections that are being made or not made. Welcome back to the Rethink Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Zierk. This podcast is where we step back, pause, reflect, and explore smarter, more connected ways to lead and live by thinking with connection in mind. Thinking with connection in mind, which is exactly what is meant by the word rethink, R-E-think, relationship-enhanced thinking. Rethinking not only your connection to yourself, but to others and the world around you. Today, we're going to rethink the topic of empathy, our ability to tap into the inner world of others and show we care. Sounds easy, sounds natural. Let's see what's really going on in this world of ours. When we forget to display empathy, to show in real time when it's really needed, it's called empathic amnesia, which is not a diagnosis. It's a cultural and psychological phenomenon that explains why compassion erodes and fades, and it fades away even among the most well-meaning people. Because the modern world swirls in relentless and competing information. Well, we're dealing with perpetual crises and accelerating change. Empathy often feels both urgently necessary and strangely out of reach. And think about that. Perhaps no more time in history do we need more empathy, but somehow it's more strangely out of reach. The concept of empathic amnesia captures this paradox. Empathic amnesia refers to the gradual loss of awareness of when and how to be empathetic, not because we lack the ability, but because we become overwhelmed, distracted, emotionally exhausted by the constant noise of our troubled world in flux. And I think we live in a world of pain. Empathy requires attention, good timing, emotional availability, and the willingness to pause long enough to enter someone else's inner world. Let's re-explore that. Empathy, it feels so natural. It almost feels like a reflex for some people. But I'm here to tell you, empathy is deliberate. It requires intentionality. In fact, an on switch. It requires that attention, good timing, when to do it, emotional availability, and the willingness to pause long enough to enter someone else's inner world. When you break it down, empathy sounds a little bit more complex, but the point I'm trying to make is it is emotionally draining. Empathy requires energy. And our modern life rarely rewards that pause, the pause to be empathetic. Now, the information around us, the information streams relentlessly. Crises stack up one on top of another, and the emotional demands compete for a limited space, our internal space. When everything seems urgent and uncontrollable, well, what happens is we begin to ration our ability and willingness to care. You might be asking, what's the cost? What's the cost of empathic amnesia? If it's happening everywhere, if the world's pain is bringing us down, and we only have so much allotted energy towards empathy, and so we have to ration it, what's the cost? Well, to begin with, when we start scrolling past suffering, where we once have lingered over, think about the missed opportunities. What happens in its place? We offer quick responses, fix, solve, or repair, instead of thoughtful questions, kind of compassionately leaning into a person's life and keeping them company, helping them hold strain of the suffering that they're experiencing. And we safeguard our stability by disconnecting from emotional burdens around us. So instead of advocating for the common good, we show indifference, we unplug, and sometimes we even begin leaning towards apathy. And as this pattern of passivity and detachment takes hold, fueled by what I call moral exhaustion, too often we just stare, where we once stepped into situations, showed that we cared, and we did things in such a way where we made a difference. And in a strange and sad way, this all makes sense. If each of us has limited bandwidth for tuning into others, which is true, showing we care and responding thoughtfully, as the world becomes more demanding, more entangled and in disarray, no wonder we are beginning to fall short in empathy and end up feeling depleted and disempowered. Again, in a strange and sad way, this all makes sense. As the world becomes more demanding and increasingly chaotic, is it really any surprise that we're starting to lack empathy or stepping away from it? Like I said earlier, empathy is intentional, and it can drain us of the energy and focus needed to stay ahead of the mounting pressures, the endless deadlines, and to competing schedules, not to mention meeting our own high internalized standards while attending to the expectations that others place on us, all that burden. So let's break this down just a little bit. Now that we've explained the concept of empathic amnesia and its origins, let's focus on addressing this phenomenon before it's too late. Before empathy becomes just something we talk about more than something we practice. You probably have felt some people who have strategically engaged in empathy or give you a version of something that sounds empathetic, but you don't feel it. That's my fear. That authentic empathy begins replaced with artificial empathy. And when we are repeatedly exposed to distress through our headlines, that workplace stress that we experience, personal relationships, or even all the cultural upheavals that are going on around us, we unconsciously distance ourselves as a way to protect ourselves. In my book, Mind Rules, the first rule is the mind is not relational. And this is why. When the world becomes difficult, demanding, your mind says, take care of yourself. What other people need is secondary to what's most important to you. And that's the reason why the subtitle to my book, Mind Rules, is Who's in Control, You or Your Mind? You don't always have to listen to your mind. And even though your mind is being self-protective and self-preservation is its key motive, there might be something else that the world requires of you. This distancing, what's interesting about that, we begin distancing ourselves from people and disengage from opportunities to show empathy. It begins to show up as cynicism, irritation, or even emotional numbness. Now consider how many people have stopped reading or tuning in to watching the news. It's kind of a classic example of being overwhelmed and worn down. And when we are worn down and spread thin, something has to give. Nowadays, our ability to care about others, empathize with their struggles, and focus on the common good, I think it's become secondary to just getting by. If I'm right, this explains why we become impatient with emotional complexity, how cognitive reserves feel exhausted, and offering a listening ear or a helping hand or a heartfelt touch, it seems optional rather than morally essential. When I shift and I begin thinking about organizations, in organizational settings, empathic amnesia often hides behind productivity. Let's focus on the bottom line. Let's improve profits. Let's make the shareholders happy. Leaders focus on metrics and outcomes because complexity feels overwhelming. Teams might move faster, but they relate less. And emotional nuance starts to seem ineffective and distracting. The bottom line becomes more important than understanding exactly what someone is going through. What looks like indifference is often fatigue. I think that's a real critical insight. If a leader is acting differently than they once did, where there's a more felt sense of indifference, it could be explained by emotional empathic amnesia driven by fatigue. And what happens is the nervous system narrows its focus to survival and problem solving, leaving less room for sustained compassion. Now, the nervous system, why do I mention that? Everybody's heard of fight or flight mode. And I think our culture right now is driving us into this chronic low-grade fight or flight mode, where there's always opportunities to empathize with the situation. But again, because we have limited bandwidth, we have to choose very carefully and be very selective. And sometimes this exhaustion and this fatigue I'm talking about leaves us with no choice but not to show empathy. Now, to counteract empathic amnesia, a simple yet effective method is needed. So here's where we're going to begin having some fun with empathic amnesia. When practicing the following human formula for connection that I'm about to put up, you'll begin to reconnect with others on a deeper and more emotionally tuned level. So here's my critical insight for you today. How novel, how unique, right? E = MC². Perhaps some of us have seen that before. So most people recognize E = MC² from physics, of course, where Albert Einstein introduced it to explain the relationship between energy and matter. And I totally wish Einstein was here. He could explain it much better than I ever could. But imagine a psychological version of that formula, one that explains the power of connection. If this interpretation is correct, then E stands for empathy. E = empathy. M stands for mindfulness. And C² stands for compassionate curiosity. Let me break this down for you. E equals MC². Together, they describe meaningful understanding between people. And that's what we're seeking. Empathy, E, is the energy of human relationships. I like that conceptualization. Empathy is the energy of human relationships. It vitalizes and revitalizes relationships. It is the ability to feel with someone, to step into their experience and recognize their emotions, their thoughts, their dreams, their fears, and recognize them as being real and valid. Empathy, it fuels trust, it deepens conversations, and it strengthens the bonds or the connections that we strive for. Yet empathy does not appear out of nowhere. It must be generated. And that generation begins with mindfulness. Mindfulness is the steady awareness of the present moment. When we are mindful, we pause before reacting. We begin noticing our own emotions without being overwhelmed by them. We really do begin practicing the ability to be present and not reactive to the situation around us. This grounded presence becomes the mass that gives empathy substance. Without mindfulness, our responses may be impulsive, distracted, or probably very self-centered. With it, we create space to truly perceive another person. We're being mindful of what's going on in us, around us, and within the other person. Then comes compassionate curiosity, C². And like the speed of light squared in Einstein's formula, it magnifies everything. Now, curiosity means asking, what is this person experiencing? You see the pause that creates? Curiosity is the opposite of judgment. It opens the mind to what may be happening. What is this person experiencing? Compassion, it ensures the question is asked with care rather than judgment. When we combine curiosity with kindness and compassion, our understanding expands exponentially. C². We do not just hear words, we explore meanings. We seek to understand a person's history and the feelings behind them. Squared. Compassionate curiosity suggests that its impact multiplies. Each thoughtful question deepens insight, which leads to more meaningful empathy. So, in this human equation, empathy equals mindfulness times compassionate curiosity squared. The more grounded we are, and the more courageously kind our questions become, the more powerful our empathy grows. And just as Einstein's equation revealed hidden energy within matter, this reimagined formula reminds us that extraordinary connections lie within ordinary interactions. When we practice mindfulness and nurture compassionate curiosity, something amazing happens. We unlock the transformative energy of empathy in our everyday lives. So remember that manager who said during a break from an offsite leadership training program, said, I know I should feel more for my team right now, but I just don't have it in me? That was a really nice, honest, authentic declaration. His statement emphasizes the importance of understanding empathic amnesia. It's real. We are more connected to global suffering than any previous generation, yet less connected to individual pain. Now, when I put that thought together, I was thinking, I think that reveals something very unique about our current times. We're more connected to global suffering than any previous generation, yet less connected to individual pain. And like I said earlier, we live in a world of pain. Not only can we change the channel and disconnect from unwanted negativity, but we can also press the mute button internally and stop caring. Seems so matter of fact, and it's also very effective. Digital platforms create distance and distract our attention each and every day. Fighting for attention, our attention span, and it wins. Tragedies from across the world appear alongside routine updates from acquaintances, and we get exhausted. Without proximity or context, suffering becomes abstract and consequently optional, easy to ignore, easy to turn the channel or turn the TV off, and just become hyper-focused on what's going on in your life and become driven by self-involvement. It's easier to disengage from a statistic than from a person sitting across the table. Empathic amnesia, it thrives in abstraction. When faces disappear in defeats, emotional investments fade. When another story becomes just another story, we stop caring, we stop looking at the context of it and the felt humanity within it, and we just go on. Consequently, the first order in the antidote of empathic amnesia is awakening, a raising of consciousness and a reclaiming of our basic humanity, which I think is best exemplified by our capacity for empathy. I think that's one of the things that we'll always have over and above artificial intelligence, is our capacity for insight and empathy. And empathy is the cornerstone of meaningful, enduring relationships. In a previous podcast, I put together a thought process, and it went something like this. Without connection, communication fails. Without communication, relationships fail. Without relationships, personal growth and development fail. Now, what's really interesting, if you're truly interested in personal growth and development, it all requires our ability to make good connections. And the greatest way, the most facilitative way to make a connection is by beginning to practice empathy. And by practicing empathy and reminding ourselves of our remarkable ability to understand another person's mental state and emotional tone, we reignite the mutual benefits of compassion, trust, and effective communication. Wow, it almost sounds too good to be true, but it's at our fingertips. We need to remind ourselves that an extraordinary connection lies within ordinary interactions. Have to remind ourselves of that. When we practice mindfulness and nurture compassionate curiosity, I think we unlock the transformative power of empathy in our everyday lives. Can't overstate it. Here's another twist. There's an additional force that worsens the problem, and it's called confusion. And our minds do not tolerate uncertainty. And so what's going on? There's competing narratives, there's misinformation, there's disinformation, there's ideological polarization, and they all create doubt about what is true. Take your pick. Empathy requires trust in another person's experience. When trust erodes, skepticism rises, and cynicism takes over. So if you think that we're living in a cynical world, you can see where it comes from. And people hesitate to care deeply because they fear being manipulated, misunderstood, or misled. And in this way, guardedness replaces openness. And over time, that guardedness becomes habitual. It becomes a habit, something that we do without thinking. Empathic amnesia, then, is not evidence of moral weakness. It reflects emotional strain in an environment that constantly demands our attention and questions our ability to trust. So here's our call to action this week. Related to empathic amnesia, if forgetting empathy is a natural response to overload, remembering it must be intentional. I introduced a simple framework I called the human version of E = MC². And you recall in this equation, empathy becomes the outcome of mindfulness multiplied by compassionate curiosity squared. We exponentiate it. I wanted to reinforce that mindfulness grounds us in the present moment, helping us to regulate our own reactions, while compassionate curiosity invites us to ask thoughtful, non-judgmental questions that expand understanding. Quite literally, we get out of ourselves, utilizing compassionate curiosity. We're expanding our minds by doing so as well. When we combine grounded awareness with sincere curiosity, empathy grows exponentially. So I just let the cat out of the bag. We do not need to fix every problem in the world. We do need to treat the person in front of us with dignity, attentiveness, and care. It seems to be in such short supply lately. Small, deliberate practices counteract the drift towards numbness and reestablish connection. So if today's conversation resonates, understand this. Empathic amnesia is not a sign of weakness. It's a reflection of the human condition saturated by problems. We all feel overwhelmed and helpless about what's going on around us. It's universal. The question is whether you're ready to embrace empathic opportunities by practicing the E = MC² formula. Also, remember that empathy is not a permanent trait. It is a disciplined skill choice. You choose to be empathic. Empathy is best delivered in real time when it's really needed. So I'd also like to invite you to visit my website at davidzierk.com, where you can sign up for my newsletter called Refresh, download a ton of resources, read a blog or two, and learn more from my quizzes and my speaker topics. I have a YouTube channel called Whiteboard Psychology, where I make learning about psychology visible, relatable, and I do it in really short segments. I also share quick tips on relationship intelligence on YouTube and Instagram. So today, as always, this has been fun. And until next time, I encourage you to keep rethinking how you show up and do life. Thanks for tuning in.